Susan Johnson had never been meant to matter. Born to the outer edges of pack society, unclaimed and politically insignificant, she'd learned early that invisibility was survival. But the mark burning on her wrist changed everything, because Alpha King Larry Coleman hadn't just saved her life, he'd bound her to him with forbidden magic, and now, by ancient law, she had to die for it. She threw herself between the blade and the Alpha King, then woke in his bed wearing his mark and a death sentence. Susan saw the glint of steel before anyone else did. She'd been standing at the edge of the gathering plaza, pressed against the cold marble column where low-ranking pack members like her were meant to stay, silent, invisible, irrelevant. Alpha King Larry Coleman stood on the dais above the crowd, his voice carrying across the assembly with that commanding resonance that made even the most defiant wolves bow their heads. Then the assassin moved. Susan didn't think. Thinking was for people who mattered, who had pack standing, who had something to protect. Susan had none of those things. She was unclaimed, unmarked, politically non-existent, expendable. She lunged forward, shoving through bodies that barely registered her presence. Her arms came up as the blade descended, and she felt the impact like lightning splitting her open. The weapon drove into her shoulder, angled perfectly to reach her heart. Poison burned through her veins instantly. Not fire, but ice. Liquid frost that turned her blood to slush, her muscles to stone. Susan hit the ground hard. The plaza stones were wet beneath her, dark with something she couldn't focus on. Above her, the world erupted into chaos. Shouting, guards converging, boots hammering stone. But it felt distant, muffled, like she was hearing it from underwater. Someone dropped to their knees beside her, large hands pressed against her chest, trying to stem the bleeding. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, at him trying to hold her together when she could feel herself unraveling from the inside out. The poison wasn't just killing her, it was dissolving her, cell by cell, turning her into something that never existed at all. "Stay with me." The voice was raw, furious. She'd heard Alpha King Larry speak dozens of times from a distance, always controlled, always authoritative. Now, up close, he sounded almost frantic. "Don't you dare close your eyes." Susan tried to focus on his face. Sharp features, storm gray eyes that burned with alpha fire, even in human form. A jaw clenched so tight she thought it might shatter. He looked enraged. Kings probably didn't appreciate when invisible pack members bled out during their speeches. "I don't even know your name," he said, and something in his voice cracked. "That's the point," she wanted to tell him. "Nobody does." Her lips moved. Nothing came out. The cold had reached her throat now, climbing higher, filling her mouth with the taste of metal and ash. She could feel the poison wrapping around her heart like barbed wire, tightening, constricting, squeezing out the last struggling beats. The Alpha King's face blurred. The screaming faded. Darkness swallowed her whole. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe. It will make my day. Now, back to our story. The first thing Susan felt was heat. Not the cold that had consumed her as she died, and she had died, she was certain of it. She'd felt her heart stutter, then stop, felt the poison close around her lungs like a fist. But this was different. This was warmth against her skin, like standing in sunlight after a lifetime spent in shadow. The second thing she felt was pain. It radiated from her chest in deep, relentless waves. Not the searing agony of the poisoned blade, but something older, something that felt like her entire body had been disassembled and rebuilt by hands that weren't entirely sure where the pieces belonged. Her muscles ached, her bones felt wrong, her mouth tasted like copper and smoke. Susan tried to move and immediately regretted it. Every nerve screamed in protest. "Don't." The voice was low, rough with exhaustion. "You'll reopen the wound." She forced her eyes open. The room came into focus slowly, swimming through layers of haze. High vaulted ceilings, dark stone walls carved with ancient pack symbols, a fireplace large enough to stand in, flames casting restless shadows across furniture that looked older than her entire bloodline. Heavy wood, intricate metalwork, fabrics she'd only ever seen from a distance during royal processions. This wasn't a healer's ward. This wasn't even the medical wing. This was someone's private chamber. And sitting in a chair beside the bed, looking like he hadn't slept in days, was Alpha King Larry Coleman. His eyes met hers, sharp, assessing, haunted. Then he leaned forward, and Susan saw it. The mark on her wrist. His mark. The room tilted, her breath caught, because she knew what that meant, what it had to mean. She should have been dead. Instead, she'd been claimed, marked, bound to the Alpha King with magic so powerful it had overridden death itself. And now, by ancient law, she had to die for it. The silence stretched between them like a blade. Susan's fingers moved to her wrist, trembling as they traced the mark, intricate, burning, unmistakable. Alpha marks were supposed to be chosen, ceremonial, witnessed by the entire Pack Council under full moon law. This was none of those things. "You should be dead." Larry's voice was flat, devoid of the authority she'd heard from the dais. He looked hollowed out, like something vital had been carved from him. The blade was coated with shadow vein poison. It stops the heart in minutes. No healer can reverse it. No magic can purge it. Susan's throat felt raw. Then how? "I marked you." The words came out harsh, almost accusatory. "Emergency Alpha Bond. It's ancient, forbidden for a reason. The mark flooded your system with enough alpha magic to burn out the poison before it reached your heart." She stared at him, at the man who ruled every pack from the northern territories to the southern coast, the man whose word was law, the man who'd just broken that law to save her. "You didn't ask." The accusation slipped out before she could stop it. Something flickered in his eyes, guilt maybe, or fury she couldn't quite read. "You were dying. Consent isn't possible when someone's heart has already stopped beating." The mark pulsed against her skin, and suddenly she felt it, his emotions bleeding through the bond, bone-deep exhaustion, protective rage, fear so sharp it felt like her own. Susan pulled back from the sensation, gasping, "What is this?" "The bond." Larry stood abruptly, turning toward the fire. His shoulders were rigid. "It's not just a mark, it's a connection. You'll feel what I feel, know when I'm in danger." "The council cannot know." His voice turned to steel. "Not yet." Susan's pulse hammered. "What happens when they do find out?" Larry didn't turn around. The firelight cast his face in shadow. "Ancient law is clear. Anyone marked outside a sanctioned mating bond is considered a corruption risk." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "The punishment is execution." The healer arrived at dawn. Susan watched from the bed as the woman examined the mark with clinical detachment, her fingers hovering over Susan's wrist without touching. When she finally looked up at Larry, her expression was grave. "The bond is the only reason she's breathing, Your Majesty. Without it, the shadow vein would have crystallized her blood." A pause. "But you already knew that." Larry's jaw tightened. He dismissed her with a curt nod. The healer hadn't been gone 5 minutes when footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that carried authority. A council messenger entered without knocking, a tall man with silver streaking his temples and eyes that catalogued everything. His gaze landed on Susan, then dropped to her wrist where the mark was still visible above the blanket. "Your Majesty," his tone was carefully neutral, "the council has questions about the woman who intercepted the assassination attempt. They wish to express gratitude for her service." The lie was so transparent it barely qualified as one. "Tell the council I'll address them when she's recovered." Larry's voice could cut stone. The messenger's eyes flickered to Susan again. "Of course, though I should mention there are already whispers about how she survived, about what methods were used." The door closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid. Susan's hands fisted in the sheets. What does the law say, exactly? Larry moved to the window, his back to her. Section 12 of the Ancient Codes. Any individual marked by an alpha outside a sanctioned mating bond is considered a corruption risk. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. The punishment is execution. It started as pressure behind her eyes. Susan was sitting in Larry's chambers, still under guard, still hidden from the council, when the sensation crawled up her spine like ice water. Wrong. Something was wrong. Not pain, but awareness, sharp and insistent, drawing her attention toward the door. Someone's coming. The words left her mouth before she understood why she'd said them. Larry looked up from the documents he'd been reviewing. The guard rotation isn't for... No. Susan stood, her pulse hammering. The pressure intensified, became a roar in her skull. Someone wants you dead, right now. The door opened. A servant entered carrying a silver tray with wine and goblets, head bowed respectfully. Susan's vision tunneled. The killing intent was so thick she could taste it, metallic, vicious, aimed like a blade at Larry's throat. Don't drink that! Susan lunged forward, knocking the tray from the servant's hands. Glass shattered, wine splashed across stone, hissing where it touched the floor. The liquid ate through the rock like acid. The servant's mask of deference cracked. His hand went for a concealed blade. Larry moved faster. He had the man pinned against the wall before Susan could blink, alpha power radiating off him in waves that made her teeth ache. Guards flooded the room. The assassin was dragged away, still struggling. But Susan barely registered it. The bond was screaming now. Larry's rage and her terror tangled together until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The room spun. Her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Susan! Susan! Larry's voice cut through the chaos. Breathe! Susan gasped, clinging to his shirt as the bond slowly quieted. When she finally looked up, his expression had shifted from fury to something far more complicated. Understanding. Calculation. You didn't just save you, he said quietly. It weaponized you. Susan's breath came in ragged bursts. What does that mean? Larry's grip tightened. It means you're no longer just a liability. His jaw clenched. Now you're a target. The council's decree arrived in a sealed envelope, hand-delivered by 3 high-ranking pack officials who wouldn't meet Larry's eyes. Susan watched from the shadowed corner where she'd been placed, out of sight, as always. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. The way Larry's shoulders went rigid, the way his fingers crushed the parchment, told her everything. The officials left. Larry stood motionless, staring at the crumpled paper in his hand. They want me dead. Susan's voice was steadier than she expected. He didn't turn around. They want me to do it myself, to prove my loyalty to pack law supersedes personal attachment. Oh, lice of kingship. His laugh was bitter. When? Before the next full moon. 3 days. In front of the council, witnessed and recorded. Susan moved toward him, her bare feet silent on stone. Then do it now, quickly, without ceremony. She kept her voice flat, practical. I've always been expendable. This just makes it official. Larry spun to face her, and the fury in his eyes stole her breath. Don't. The word came out as a growl. Don't reduce yourself to nothing because that's what they've always told you are. It's the truth. It's a lie. He closed the distance between them, his hands gripping her shoulders. You threw yourself in front of an assassin's blade. You've stopped 2 attempts on my life. You're the only person in this palace I can trust, and you want me to... His voice cracked. You want me to kill you because some ancient law says your life matters less than tradition? Susan's throat burned. You're the Alpha King. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. But the words sounded hollow, even to her, because they both knew the truth. The throne demanded obedience, the council demanded blood, and Larry couldn't have her and the crown. 3 days, Susan whispered. Larry's grip tightened, then released. He turned back to the window, his silhouette carved against the dying light. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. The silence was answer enough. I wasn't being brave. Susan spoke to the darkness of Larry's chamber 2 nights before her execution. He sat across from her, firelight carving shadows across his face. When I stepped in front of that blade, I wasn't thinking about saving you. I was thinking, she swallowed hard, I was thinking that my life didn't cost anything, that trading nothing for something was just math. The silence that followed was suffocating. When Larry finally spoke, his voice was raw. You thought you were nothing? I am nothing. No pack standing, no claim, no... Stop. He was in front of her before she could finish, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that contradicted the fury in his eyes. You are not nothing. You have never been nothing. And if this kingdom has spent your entire life making you believe otherwise, then this kingdom deserves to burn. Susan's breath hitched. You can't mean that. I would rather lose the throne than lose you. The confession tore out of him like a wound finally opened. I would rather face exile, rebellion, war. I would rather watch this entire pack system collapse than stand in front of that council and... He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Susan reached up, her fingers trembling as they touched his jaw. The bond didn't choose me. You did. Yes. His forehead pressed against hers. Not to save you, to keep you. Because the moment you opened your eyes in this room, I knew... The bond flared between them, but this wasn't magic. This was choice. His hand slid into her hair, her fingers curled into his shirt. When their lips met, it wasn't desperate or frantic. It was inevitable, like gravity finally allowed to work. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Susan whispered, "They'll kill us both." Larry's smile was feral. Let them try. The fire crackled. 2 days remained. But tonight, they chose each other, and tomorrow, they'd choose rebellion. The explosion came at midnight. Susan woke to heat and smoke, flames already devouring the curtains, racing across the floor toward the bed. She rolled sideways, hit the ground hard, lungs burning as she crawled toward the door. It wouldn't open, barred from outside. Panic clawed up her throat. Then the bond screamed, not her danger, but Larry's. Multiple threats, closing in from different directions while he was separated from his guards, rushing toward her. "No!" she gasped. "It's a trap!" The door exploded inward. Larry stood in the wreckage, alpha power radiating off him like a shockwave. Behind him, the corridor was chaos. Guards fighting assassins, steel clashing, bodies falling. "Get behind me." He pulled her through the flames into the hallway. 3 attackers emerged from the smoke simultaneously. Susan felt their intent like knives in her skull, coordinated, synchronized, designed to overwhelm. "Left! 2 more coming from the left!" Larry moved like violence given form. He tore through the first assassin, deflected the second's blade, but the third lunged past him, straight for Susan. Larry caught the attacker's wrist mid-strike, bones snapped audibly. Then he pulled Susan against his chest, turning his back to shield her from another blade that came whistling from the shadows. The weapon bit into his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Instead, he did something unthinkable. His hand clamped over the mark on her wrist, and alpha magic surged between them, deliberate, public, binding. The mark flared brilliant gold, visible to everyone in the smoke-filled corridor. Guards, assassins, and worse, council members, drawn by the commotion, now frozen in the archway. Larry marked her again, openly. Witnesses be damned. The bond solidified like steel forged in fire. Silence fell, broken only by crackling flames. Then, gasps, horrified whispers, a council elder's voice, trembling with rage. Treason! Larry's eyes burned gold as he faced them, still holding Susan. Yes, he said simply, it is. The council chamber had never felt so much like a courtroom. Susan stood beside Larry on the raised platform, her wrist still blazing with the fresh mark. 20 council members sat in judgment, their faces ranging from fury to fear. Behind them, the gallery overflowed with witnesses, nobles, guards, servants who'd seen the hallway confrontation. "You have violated sacred law," Council Elder Miriam declared, rising from her seat. "Twice. The punishment for such deliberate defiance is abdication and exile for both of you." "I violated nothing." Larry's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "I invoked Emergency Alpha Protocol, ancient law that supersedes your precious Section 12. That protocol applies only in cases of imminent pack-wide threat. There have been 4 assassination attempts in 6 days," Larry gestured to Susan. "She sensed every one, stopped 3. This bond didn't corrupt anything. It exposed the rot already festering in this court." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Susan felt it then, the killing intent, sharp and sudden, aimed directly at Larry from within the council itself. Her eyes snapped to the source. "Elder Torrance, 3rd row. He's about to—" Torrance lunged, a concealed blade flashing toward Larry's throat. Larry caught his wrist without looking, twisting until the weapon clattered to the floor. "Arrest him. Search his quarters. You'll find correspondence with the Southern faction, the ones who've been trying to destabilize the throne for the past year." Guards swarmed Torrance. Within minutes, 2 other council members tried to flee. They didn't make it past the doors. The chamber erupted into chaos. Larry's voice boomed over the noise. "Section 12 was written to prevent corruption, but it's been used to protect it." He pulled Susan closer, his hand over her mark. "This bond saved my life. Her ability protects this throne, and I will not execute her to satisfy laws written by the same people who just tried to murder me." Silence crashed down. "The mark stands. Susan Johnson is under my protection. Anyone who challenges that challenges me." Elder Miriam stared at him, her face pale. "You're breaking the law." "No." Larry's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'm changing it." The council vote came 3 days later. Section 12 would be amended. Emergency alpha bonds would be reviewed case by case rather than condemned outright. The law that had sentenced Susan to death was fractured, if not yet broken. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Susan stood on the palace balcony overlooking the gathering plaza, the same place where she'd thrown herself in front of an assassin's blade. Below, pack members moved through the square, their lives continuing as if the entire foundation of their world hadn't just shifted. "Having second thoughts?" Larry's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar through the bond before he spoke. "About surviving? No. About whether I deserve to. You saved my life. You exposed a conspiracy. You forced an entire political system to confront its own brutality." He moved beside her, his hand finding hers. "You've earned the right to stop asking that question." The mark on her wrist pulsed softly, no longer a death sentence, but a declaration. She'd spent her entire life being invisible, expendable, trained to take up no space. Now she stood beside the Alpha King in full view of the kingdom. "The council still doesn't trust me," she said quietly. "The council doesn't trust change. They'll adapt. And if they don't, we'll replace them." "We?" His smile was slight but genuine. "You're not my liability, Susan. You're not my weapon. You're my partner, my equal, the woman who chose to risk everything when she had nothing to gain." Susan looked out over the plaza at the place where she'd believed her life had no value. The autumn sun caught the mark on her wrist, making it gleam like molten gold. She'd been saved, then condemned, then weaponized. But now? Now she was chosen, and she chose this, chose him, chose fight over invisibility, chose to matter. "Together," she whispered. Larry's hand tightened around hers. "Always." The mark burned bright between them, not a curse, but a promise, not a death sentence, a beginning.